Step C, titrating the sample. This video will show the proper method for titrating water samples as part of the dissolved oxygen test. For this step, you will need titration tube code 0608 or 0299, starch indicator code 4170WT/G, direct reading titrator code 0377, and sodium thiosulfate code 4169-H. This entire process should be completed for one sample bottle before starting the second sample. Rinse the titration tube 3 times with a small amount of the fixed sample from the first sample bottle. Be careful not to use too much of your sample so that you are sure you have enough to conduct the test. Pour the waste into a waste container or broadcast it over a vegetated area. Fill the titration tube to the 20 milliliter line with fixed sample water from the sample bottle. If you overfill, you can carefully flick the excess sample water into the waste bucket or onto vegetation so that the bottom of the meniscus is touching the 20 milliliter line. Remember, the sample contains caustic reagents, so use caution. Now add 8 drops of Starch Indicator to the tube and cap with the titration tube cap, which has a hole in the center. Gently swirl to mix. The sample should turn dark blue to black. You will need to fill the direct reading titrator with sodium thiosulfate by depressing the titrator and placing it into the hole in the top of the sodium thiosulfate reagent bottle. Invert both the bottle and titrator and draw out the titrant until the large ring on the plunger is opposite the 0 line on the scale. Make sure that there are no air bubbles in the titrator. If there are bubbles, you can push the sodium thiosulfate back into the bottle and refill. Keep the bottle inverted throughout this process. Sometimes you may need to do this several times to eliminate the bubbles. Next, insert the filled titrator into the center hole of the titration tube cap. Add 1 drop at a time of the sodium thiosulfate into the titration tube. Gently swirl the tube between drops. You do not need to count the drops for this test. Continue titrating by adding more drops, one at a time, until the dark blue or black solution turns completely clear. Hold the tube against a white background to be sure that the solution is clear and not faint blue. Note that it may take more time for the color change to occur during cold weather. Once the solution is clear, read the number on the titrator where the whitest part of the plunger meets the line on the scale. Each minor division on the titrator scale equals 0.2 ppm or parts per million. Record the value to the nearest 0.2 ppm on your data form for rep number 1. If the plunger tip reaches the bottom line on the titrator scale, or 10 ppm, before you have reached the titration endpoint, refill the titrator to the 0 line with additional sodium thiosulfate and continue the titration. To determine the oxygen concentration, add the original 10 ppm to the second ppm value and record the total value. Repeat the procedures of this step for the second sample bottle and record the results for rep 2 on the data form. If the DO results for rep 1 and rep 2 are not within 0.6 ppm of each other, repeat the steps for titrating the fixed sample in the first bottle. If results still vary by more than 0.6 ppm, repeat the steps for titrating with the sample in the second bottle. If there are still not 2 results within 0.6 ppm of one another, you will need to repeat the entire test by beginning with sample collection. Leftover titrant or sodium thiosulfate in the titrator could have been contaminated with the water sample and should be discarded. Do not return leftover titrant to the bottle. As you can see, the dissolved oxygen test has many steps, and at times you have to wait for reactions to take place between the steps. For this reason, many volunteers like to begin with the dissolved oxygen test so that they can move on to the other tests while waiting for DO reactions to complete.